This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Damn!
It's by the rules, folks.
Which seems easy, but Shawn didn't know what going Dutch was.
Wait, did you just insult me?
Right, so something could be cattywampus before it went completely cactus.
I can't say what I'm thinking right now.
It's like American football.
I think challenge rating is the worst way to balance encounters except for all the other ones.
Oh, banana hammocks.
I had a friend whose nickname was Pork Chop.
James, are you ready? Do you have your 5 or 6?
Oh, baby, I'm ready.
All that and more right now.
What?
Hello,
What
everybody.
Throw the take. Can the take.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 mailbag podcast in all the realms. That's right, we are doing a bit of a time warp here. We are in the past while real us are in the future. This was pre-recorded episode. So we're going to do a deep dive into the mailbag. Hopefully Wizards of the Coast doesn't bring out a playtest packet or a 50-minute long video in the meanwhile. But leading up to Gen Con, what could they possibly announce? What could they possibly announce? My name's Ben Byrne, by the way. And I am joined by Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, and I want to welcome Dael Kingsmill and Shawn Merwin to James and I's game show, Guess the Slang. Shawn, you're on my team. Dael, you're on James's team. And basically, I'm going to ask Shawn about Aussie slang. James is going to ask Dael about American slang. And whoever scores the most at the end is the winner. Sound good? Good.
Great.
Excellent. Who feels confident? Who wants to go first? James, do you want to ask?
I feel solidly Americanized. We got this.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, I do think that American slang will probably be a little bit easier to get than Aussie slang because it's, of our cultural hegemony over, the media landscape. But
that's true.
I think we've got a few regionalisms that might get you, Dael. Okay. I'll start easy.
All right.
What's the act of going Dutch?
I take it all back. I have no idea what's happening. Going Dutch. Going
it's something
Dutch.
It's something that you might
is to ride a bicycle.
I was worried that I wouldn't even know the American slang, so I feel a little more confident now.
Going Dutch is not riding a bicycle. That's a pretty good guess, honestly. Going Dutch is something that that two people will do on a date, and it's evenly splitting the bill.
Oh, I wouldn't have got that.
Evenly
I wouldn't have got
the bill
that.
on a date.
Wow.
So do you ask that?
Going
Like, if I'm on a
Dutch.
double date, do I say, so are we going to go Dutch on this, or are we going Dutch on this?
Well, it's not a double date. It's a date with you and your date.
Right.
Oh,
But it's
you are the
you want to go
double.
Dutch? I'm like, yeah, let's go Dutch.
Is that rude
Okay.
to ask if you're on a date?
I think it's a cute way of
I think
asking
going
it.
Dutch is really, I think it's very, very common. I mean, I think it might be the baseline assumption unless you have some particularly old-fashioned gender roles.
All right, well, that is currently 0 points to your team. I think the rules generally, we should probably lay out some rules. It is a gaming podcast, so let's lay out some more rules. You can put it in a sentence for them. And if the other person can snag it, then it can be a point to the other team, which seems easy, but Shawn didn't know what going Dutch was, so...
I did. I knew.
Oh, you did? Oh, sorry.
Because I'm old, and that's an old-fashioned.
Yeah,
It is a
it'll
bit
become a
old-fashioned.
problem the minute that can't be a rule, because if it's Shawn versus me on Australian slang, that's bad.
No, I'm pretty sure you'll get most of these. Most of these are all
Wait,
right.
did you just insult me? I think you just insulted me. And
I
that's
hope
fine.
on the list.
I like that.
I hope you have Seppo on the list.
All
You want
right.
to talk about
Starting off,
insults.
what I'm told is pretty easy. A first word to guess is Sheila, which is a noun. What is a Sheila?
Female. Female.
Correct.
Yeah.
Not used here very often anymore, to be honest. But
Now, is it an attractive woman or is it any woman?
As far as I know, it's any woman. You're more
Basically
likely to
any,
hear it in
yeah.
a country town.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of Sheilas were down down at the grocery store talking about something. I don't know.
So it's not a derogatory way, as Karen might be here.
It's not
I
particularly
guess it
nice.
sort of is, but I don't know. It's not derogatory enough that it would like offend me. Does that make sense?
Get you punched.
If we called a woman a broad here, that would, one, be weirdly old-fashioned, and two, probably insulting.
Probably a very apt comparison, to be honest, because Sheila's not like, it's not like a Karen as in like it has inherent negative connotation, but it is a little bit, maybe a bit old-fashioned, a bit chauvinistic, probably unintentionally on behalf of
Rocky on chat says chick.
That's it.
Chick
that's
is pretty
it.
close.
Oh, chick is yes. I think that's a good comparison.
If you're an Australian dude who's like older than maybe 45, you say Sheila. If you're younger than that, you say chick, probably.
Yeah. It does probably come from a place of like chauvinism, but also it's really ill-meaning. So I've never known anyone to be offended by it.
All right, James Hake, your second chance.
I think it's an auxiliary verb. You said noun. This one's complicated. Fixing to do something. Fixing to do something.
Fixing to do it.
Or people might say finna these days. I'm finna do something. I'm finna do this.
Okay.
I'm finna go for a walk. That's more African American vernacular English there, but
I have certainly heard both of these, and now I'm worried that it's more complicated than my sort of contextual clues have gathered over time. But it's I'm gonna do this thing, right?
Yeah,
I'm
I
preparing
intend
to do this thing. I intend to do it. Yeah. Go on.
All right, there we go. Point each so far. Shawn, if I was to call someone a pork chop, if I was to say they're being a bit of a pork chop, what would I mean?
Kind of a fool.
Dael? Yeah.
I'd pay it.
Yeah.
I'd pay it.
Yep. Carrying on like a pork chop.
Yeah.
Carrying on like a fool, like a dope. 2 points to us.
I had a
James,
friend whose nickname was Pork Chop.
There you go.
Here's some New York slang for you. What's a New York minute?
In a New York minute, ooh, everything can change in a New York minute. Let me see. I assume, based on what the Eagles tell me, that it's a minute that seems to go faster than a regular minute.
Yeah, more or less.
I have no idea.
I'd call it even simpler, just an instant in a hot sec.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'll give that one to you.
Thank you.
What are hundreds and thousands?
Hundreds and
Numbers.
thousands.
I
I
love
think.
this one.
Oh, so wait, are you? This is a slang. This is
This has
Australian
come
slang.
up
Yeah.
so many times.
Could you
during
use
this
it in a
trip.
sentence for me?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm trying to put it in a sentence without just giving it away. I went to the store and bought hundreds and thousands. I was throwing a party and I needed hundreds and thousands. Was on my shopping
It just sounds like a lot.
What if we were to say, I used hundreds and thousands on my fairy bread?
All I could come up with is a way too much.
Okay, not quite.
Okay.
Fairy bread was going to be the other thing I was going to put on here, but I thought that was too obvious.
Oh, are they sprinkles?
Correct.
And it's not a brand. It's just the way that it's described.
There might be a brand somewhere, but if there is, it's become so genericized.
Yeah.
You know, on the East Coast of America, we have a special word for sprinkles also. Do they use it in your part of New York, Shawn, or is that more of a Jersey
I
thing?
think so, but I want to hear what you have to say. Does it begin with J?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We call them Jimmies on the
Jimmies,
East
yeah.
Coast.
Jimmies.
That's not on my
I've heard
list.
of Jimmies. Jimmies are the ones that you should use in various baking things because they don't bleed color.
Oh,
Interesting. I didn't
okay.
know it was a brand that went genericized. Neat.
See, I would say hundreds
No
and
idea.
thousands probably refer specifically to like hard candy sprinkles as opposed
Well,
to
as
like
in the
those
little
long-
round circles, yeah.
Yeah. As
Spherical
opposed to
ones.
those like long soft candy,
Gotcha.
you know, the little like noodly looking ones.
Dael, what's an Irish goodbye? It's a
Oh,
verb.
wait, I know this. An Irish goodbye is when you leave a party without saying goodbye to anyone?
Yes. Yes. When you leave a social function without saying goodbye, just right out the back door.
I've heard that recently for some reason. I can't remember
So
why.
did I. It was in a show recently. I don't know which show though.
Shawn, if I was to describe something as cactus, what would it be? If I was to be like, it's cactus.
Dry.
Something that is cactus could be dry, but that's not quite right.
It's a very good guess.
Yeah, it's a very good guess. I love this one, actually. It's one of my personal favorites.
Use it in a sentence.
Oh, man, I was playing PlayStation the other day, but then my TV went cactus. Actually, no, I was going to get real mean-spirited for a second there. It basically means something is dead. If something has died, it's cactus, you know. It's a bit of a casual term.
Yeah, I've never
A rabbit ran across the road the other day, hit it with my car, now it's cactus.
The rabbit or the car?
I gotta use that. That's great.
Both, possibly, yeah.
What is cattywampus? It's an adjective.
You made this up.
I assure you I did not. This is the most Aussie sounding thing on my list.
I thought that was Australian.
I think it's like Tennessee, Kentucky sort of southernism.
This is a noun?
It's an adjective. It's all cattywampus.
It's all cattywampus.
I was planning a party, but it's all cattywampus. I was trying to how do I say this without giving it all away? I'm putting up string lights in my bedroom, but they're all cattywampus.
I can only think that it must be like it's all a mess. It's all gotten it's a mess.
I would take that. Crooked, askew, in disarray.
Right, so something could be cattywampus before it went completely cactus.
Yes.
Hey.
Right. Yes.
All right, Shawn, what is, I don't know if this one's an easy one or not. What is a goon bag?
I say what now?
What is a goon bag?
A goon bag.
Correct.
I feel like one right now, but I don't know. An old dude in a green shirt. Just guessing.
No, a goon bag is, cask wine that you get in a box.
What?
If you open the box and pull
What's
out a
worse,
silver
drinking from a
bag.
goon bag or doing a shoey?
Before. Yes,
Have I?
we have talked about this before, and I did not remember, and I feel bad, and I should be ashamed of myself. Yes, a goon
Oh
bag
yeah, it came up because it was a monster in something.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Real Lorecast heads would know.
Yes, I should have known that.
Famous for the game Goon of Fortune, where you attach goon bags to a clothesline and spin it, and whichever one ends up in front of you, you drink from.
I suddenly understand why people think Australians are lying all the time.
All right, Dael, here's my last one. This I'm pulling out all the stops on this one. This is Seattle local slang. What is a tolo? It's a noun. What is tolo? Tolo.
Tolo. It's going to be short for something. Something that starts with T-O and then L-O.
Is this good podcasting?
Yeah, I have no idea.
All right, I'll
totally
keep
local.
going. It's not that. I'm going to keep going because this one is weird. Shawn, do you know what a tolo is offhand?
I was going to guess a toll booth, but that
nope, it's not that either. This is very specific Pacific Northwest slang. It's derived from Chinook jargon, the language that colonial settlers and the Chinook natives used when the region was first settled. And I believe it has something to do with a local club from the University of Washington that has since spread to the rest of the region. Here's using it in a sentence. She invited me to the Tolo.
She invited me to the Tolo? From a club to the Tolo. To the Toga Low Party.
This is another kind of old-fashioned one. It's a very gender-specific one, but they were still around when I was in high school. Shawn, you might know of a Sadie Hawkins dance.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
synonyms.
Yep.
It's a dance where the girl invites the guy.
Right.
A synonym for the Sadie Hawkins dance?
Yes,
Wild.
the Tolo Club at
That's
University of
deep
Washington.
slang.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
No one was ever going to get that one. I'm very proud of that.
I like that.
One more for Shawn. What are budgie smugglers?
It's nothing clean.
I know what I'm thinking right now, and luckily I got through customs. But yeah.
Follow that instinct.
Yeah, I mean it's I can't say what I'm thinking right now. A smuggler who uses various parts of their anatomy to move goods.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. I see where you.
Yeah.
Sort of in no way whatsoever. Budgie smugglers, bathers.
Cuzzies, swimmers. We're just getting the broad strokes of or swimming costume. Sorry, there's so many slang terms for swimsuits. There we go.
Well, it's not a swimsuit suit specifically. It's like a pair of. It's like a tight pair of Speedos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was in the right nether region there.
Yeah. Quite literally.
Yeah.
That's good.
Because it looks like you're smuggling a budgerigar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or banana hammocks as weird as.
Yep.
Right.
Togs.
That's the term
Horrible
here.
Cabbage is right. There is another swimming costume slang. Togs. I miss togs.
All right. I stopped taking score at some point, James. Do you know where you're on?
I believe we're all winners here.
We're all winners.
Dael got 4 out of 6.
Yeah,
you know what? This whole game just got all cattywampus.
And now everyone's going to be using it.
This is why I laughed when James said chock-a-block in the last episode, is because I was going to put that on my list of questions, and then he just said
it's chockers.
Absolute chockers today.
I love the first couple of weeks that I was saying here, I kept saying unintentional slang words, and I don't remember what kicked it off, but I said something. And my roommate Jordy was like, I don't know what that is. And I had to explain. He thought, I thought you meant like tracksuit pants, like sweatpants. And I said, oh no, those are tracky dacks. And he was like, that can't be real.
Ben, if you'd put servo on the list, would you have gotten it, Shawn?
Servo. No.
Yeah, that blindsided me when I was in Oz for the first time.
Okay, service station, like a refueling
petrol station.
Station. Yeah.
A gas station for
gas
us Americans.
station.
Would you have gotten bottle-o? Would you have known what a bottle-o is?
I barely know
Just
what my own English language words are. You're asking
I feel like
me
if
all
we
of this
follow on from servo, service station becomes servo. Bottle-o is, of course, the place you go for your bottles.
I've spent my whole life eliminating slang from my vocabulary, and now you're asking me to know
to bring it back.
Slang from another country. It's a good country, but a different country.
I don't know whether there's an equivalent of like bottle-os over here, because you'll just sell grog in the grocery store.
Yeah, that's a pretty recent development.
In the grocery store, like we have we have a bottle-o that's basically attached to the grocery store, owned by the grocery store. It may as well be the same shop.
There might be a door that goes directly from it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we should probably talk about some.
All right, we better actually start the episode.
Yeah, we better talk about some tabletop RPGs.
Been half an hour.
Tabletop RPG podcast. Well, we are currently at Gen Con. When this episode comes out, it will be Wednesday, 10 a.m., the day before Gen Con. Dael, Shawn, myself, and Dante will all be at Gen Con. So come swing by the Ghostfire Gaming booth. One of us might be there. We'll be dropping in and out, but if you'd run into us on the show floor, speaking for myself at least, but I'm sure others as well, tell me if not. Stop me, say hi. Would love to say hi to folks there.
I will also be at Gen Con. If you're there, you can find me on Saturday night at 7 p.m. I'm going to be playing in a giant-sized game for D&D to do with the Big B's Giants book, and it's going to be really cool. We're going to have, let me see if I can remember everyone. So I believe it's Brennan Lee Mulligan DMing, and then playing, it's going to be me, Gabe Hicks, Erica Ishii. We've got Luis Carasso. We've got Jeremy Crawford on the squad. And I think that's it. So I hope you can make it to that. I've got my details here. So it's Saturday, August 5th, 7 p.m. And it is part of the Gen Con catalog, but it's technically off-site. So you can find us in the Indiana Roof Ballroom. So it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Also, keep an eye on the Ghostfire Gaming YouTube and socials. I might be doing some updates and stuff there, being like, my first Gen Con, look at me, I'm doing TikTok. I'm trying to be young. Anyway, moving on. Phoenix asked a question. Dael, where did Phoenix send their question to?
Why, I believe they sent it to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Got it in one. Phoenix's question is about using music and atmosphere in their tabletop RPGs. And I think more specific than just like playing music at the table to create a mood. They're asking if you are inspired perhaps during your game preparation by a specific song or poem, or if there's, let's say, a song in a trailer associated with a specific campaign setting, like a sea shanty. Do you find a way to incorporate that song or poem or like small performance piece into the game directly? Find a moment to play it, find a moment to recite it.
I'm doing that with my current campaign right now, actually. There is a song from a Super Nintendo RPG called Chrono Trigger that I found a cover of online. Some guy doing this beautiful guitar cover, and he's singing his own lyrics over it. And I rewrote the lyrics to that and found an instrumental of it, and I incorporated that as a sort of prophecy in my own game. Very fun. It really makes me wish he had a vocalist backing track, because his the way he plays that song is so perfect and so different from any of the other covers on YouTube. But I would feel like a real jerk to go up to this guy and says, "Hey, can you send me a version of that without your voice? I'm trying to do it for my D&D game." So I make do.
I was very inspired by God of War came out right as I was running Tomb of Annihilation, and I replaced Artus Simba, I believe the character's name is, and his dragonborn compatriot who kind of wander freely around Chult, and the players can kind of run into them at any point during the adventure. They're kind of in the DM's back pocket to just kind of pull out to create an interesting session out of. I replaced them basically with Kratos and Atreus. Replaced the Ring of Winter with the Axe of Winter. And they were like renamed and given their own lore, so it wasn't literally a God of War wandering around Chult, but to all extents and purposes, those were the two characters. Built them up during the campaign. Was like, yeah, you got to find these dudes. They're hanging out in there. They're on a quest. You've got to go find them. You might run into them. They might not be friendly when you run into them, so just be wary when you come across them. And when they did finally show up, I hit play on the first track from that God of War soundtrack. And I was like, as you lean down to pick something up off the ground, you hear a whoosh motion over your head and a thunk as an axe embeds itself into the tree trunk, and a kind of crystallizing sound as ice spreads across the tree from the head of the axe. And as I'm describing that, we got the boom, like that real heartbeat kind of moment. It was perfect. Backfired because that song's also just on my general at the table playlist. So every time it plays now, my group go, oh, "Is he here? Has he arrived again?" So yeah, awesome moment, but I need to kick it off my general soundtrack.
It's the danger. I constantly make this mistake with my background music where I'll put in a couple tracks that are specific to a certain scene we're doing. I don't know, there was a fancy rich person soiree my players were at, and I was like, I'll just chuck a couple of those in, and I keep forgetting to remove them. So then they'll just be out and about in the city streets, and it'll be like, here's a harp, not what I'm looking for.
The times I've tried to use music with my home group, they're easily distracted to the point where you don't even want to have any outside sounds, much less have a concentrated theme. Because I'm more likely to be mocked for it than to have anyone get any sort of expedited or enhanced experience from having that. So I try to stick to small words said in a nice, steady, even tone, so as not to spook or rouse anyone.
Don't startle them. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Although while I'm designing, I will put on a playlist or a just play one album after another from a specific group or performer, and that will be my soundtrack while I'm designing this for the entire
Hell yeah.
project. Yeah.
Yeah, same.
Was it a lot of like Heilung and like those old kind of Polish and folk bands when you guys were writing Valika? Was it just a lot of like screaming and kind of throat singing going on with heavy drums?
I listened to a ton of the band Wardruna.
Yes, they're great.
Yeah, I learned later during the Valika process that they provided soundtrack to the show Vikings, but I'm hipster insofar as I did not know they did that when I started listening to them.
Dael, because it was my follow-up question, do a similar thing, because like create a soundtrack for a campaign, even if it's not something that you will play at the table. Like I did a Fae themed campaign,
Right.
and I got a lot of vocal songs together into like about an hour and 10-minute soundtrack that I never played any of these songs during the session. It was just for me to feel like I was capturing the vibe of like a Fae forest while prepping, while writing the adventure.
I would love to do that. As it stands, so like Shawn, I find that music can be distracting if you go the wrong path, but I like having music in my games. So for playing during the games, I try to make sure that I'm picking music that is broadly from video games rather than movies, because movie music tends to be a little bit more tied to what's happening, and so it'll have these big musical stings that are really dramatic that sort of draw your attention, versus like video game music, a lot of it will be sort of designed to play in the background and kind of loop and not be noticed. So I tend to go for video games, not movies, but then also I have to dodge video games that any of my players have played. So it's like this delicate balance of trying to find the exact right kind of music that will fade into the background. And so I end up listening to that while I'm prepping games, so that if anything stands out to me and distracts me while I'm prepping, I know to get rid of it from the playlist. So I would love to listen to just good moody music, but I often just end up refining my pre-existing background music playlists.
Oh man, there's this one song from the 1980s Conan the Barbarian soundtrack that I like yearn in my heart to use in D&D, but is every time I listen to it, and just the way that you're doing, Dael, while prepping, I'm like, it's too much. It's too intense. It'll draw too much focus. And it's the choral song when he invades Thulsa Doom's hideout. It's called The Kitchen on the soundtrack, which is a very funny name for this epic song. But it's so good, but it's way too much to actually play in a combat.
It's so hard when that happens. It's so sad. It's so sad. And then, oh man, at some point I forgot my speaker when I went to run a game at a friend's house. And so I had to connect to their TV to play the music. I was going to just not play it. And they were like, no, we want the music. So I connected it. And then all my shame was visible to them on the screen as every new song came up and they could see what it was from. And they were like, is this Twilight? Is this from Twilight? Yes, it is. And you never would have known otherwise.
Gethin has asked a question of the Lorecast, wondering, by emailing podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, wondering with how unreliable challenge ratings tend to be for monsters, the famous CR system, should it be scrapped entirely? Or perhaps replaced with a monster tier system, just saying like this monster is tier 1, this monster should be used at tier 2, or can it be, is it still useful in some capacity, or should monster balance just be thrown out completely, as the game isn't meant to be balanced like a war game? Encounters are just meant to be, whatever monster is present in the story at the time.
I think challenge rating is sort of like what do they say about democracy? It's the worst form of government except for all the other ones. I think challenge rating is the worst way to balance encounters except for all the other ones, because you want a system so that for game masters that at least want to know, am I even in the right ballpark? Having a number that you can rely on is good. You cannot expect perfection in challenge ratings, because with a game as complicated as D&D is, you're never going to get it perfectly right. So I think it's good to have. You just can't expect it to be mathematically perfect, because in order to make a challenge rating system that's mathematically perfect, you're going to end up with a game that you don't want to play. So you have to take what you can get and let the rest go.
Behind the scenes, if you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a kind of hyper complicated and finicky way of building monsters, determining challenge rating that involves kind of creating an offensive CR and a defensive CR and averaging them into the actual CR. And that
like
basically
American
is how CR is
football.
determined.
Okay.
I won't even question that. But ultimately, the part when the wheels fall off the cart is when you have abilities that do not correlate to offensive or defensive CR in a way that is predictable. And honestly, based on party composition, because a certain number of damage vulnerabilities are equal to, this decrease in defensive CR, resistances and immunities are related to this increase in that. And because there are so many ways to build a D&D party with their damage types or their own weaknesses and strengths, it's a one-size-fits-all number with all the benefits and drawbacks that one-size-fits-all has, and the clothing you buy. So inevitably, you will need to make some kind of reappraisal at the table.
As much as it is lacking, it is something that is really important for like new DMs who don't know how to balance an encounter themselves.
Yeah.
It's super easy to just be like, I don't know, on average, take the player party level, average it, and do the CR equivalent. That it might not work exactly that way, but it's better to have that than nothing, and to just leave them all out at sea by themselves, even if they might encounter a situation like, oops, all barbarians. You just got to hope that it works for more people than it doesn't.
Yeah, I largely agree. I mean, I used that system, James, from the DMG when I first started running the game to ensure that I wasn't going to slaughter my players, but also ensure that I wasn't going to make challenges too easy. And that system, as imperfect as it is, works in some capacity, at least to my memory. I remember not being too upset with it. The main reason I stopped using it, again to my memory, wasn't because I was necessarily terribly dissatisfied with it, although I was realizing it wasn't a super great measurement, especially, Shawn, we've talked about, even in the last episode, shadows with that strength drain ability is just something that's really hard to account for in the CR system. But for me, it becomes like, cooking with your hands rather than measuring cups and just being like, yeah, that's about enough salt, and that's about enough of whatever other spice that I need to throw in there. So you just kind of look at the CR, like I still use CR, but it's more of a rough kind of like, okay, I want to use this monster. What's the CR? CR 12 for a level 6 party? Maybe not. Maybe I'm not looking for something that's quite that either complicated or, it can be a quick number to reference to rule things out or in before I start drilling down on what I want the encounter to really be. So I wouldn't get rid of it entirely unless it was presented with something better.
They're handy training wheels until someone has developed the sort of the muscle memory to do it on the fly.
One of the things I like to do is when I get a player who puts together some horribly broken combination and I say, this is sort of broken, other people aren't happy. They're like, well, it's in the rules, so therefore it must be right. Right? It's in the rules. I'm like, okay, if we're going to go by that way, let me design some encounters that are by the rules for you. And here come, 20 banshees. Well, they are only CR4 and you're very high level. This is actually an easy encounter. Now make 20 constitution saving throws. Oh, you rolled a 1?
Damn.
Oh, well, that's a shame. You're at 0 hit points. You're all at 0 hit points after 20 saves? That's a surprise. It's by the rules, folks.
Don't mess with Shawn.
Well, it's a way to help players understand that games are imperfect. And so you need to be able to see the imperfections and work within them instead of just treating it like it's a machine that should be fine because that's the way it was built.
Shawn's new role-playing game is called Oops, All Banshees.
Yes.
I've been thinking lately about what would a book that describes the way that I run D&D look like? What are the ways that I make an adventure? Because it's way less structured than the adventures that like I write. Like Saga of the Seasons for Valakan Clans, I think is a great adventure, but the way I wrote it is nothing like the way I would run it, because the way you write adventures for publication by a mass audience and for me at the table is completely different. But like when I run an adventure, like I did just a day or two ago, I have a very broad idea of what I want to happen, and sometimes even multiple encounters in there. And my players totally juked my expectations and went for an encounter that I didn't think they would have until the very end. And I was like, okay, I'm going to completely rearrange the order of my plot because I still want them to have these encounters. And I will just kind of change the circumstances in which they happen. And unless they stretch my story beyond the point of believability for when these encounters will happen, I still want to run them because I think they'll be fun story beats for me and for them. And so, monsters are very much the same way. They, based on like the tone of the campaign I'm running, is this horrific dark fantasy? Is this epic heroic fantasy? That kind of determines how, if a player goes down, if a player character goes down, how do I keep really going at it 100% with that monster, or do I suddenly start to make the encounter back off a bit? If they start dogpiling it and they bring it to 0 hit points in one round, do I give it 3 more health bars and have it start transforming and stuff like that over the course of the fight? And it's all based on the tone of the game, because rather than have, in the type of game I run, I should be specific. I would much rather have an epic and exciting and sort of twisty-turny fight than one that is, mechanically robust.
Open World Addicts has asked a question. What I meant to say then was Open World Addicts' question was, is Eberron dark fantasy? Eberron has been described and debated online as being a dark fantasy setting, and yet it has relatively high magic and high magical concepts. Now, I'm not an Eberron expert. Eberron knows that. So would any of the three of you describe Eberron as being particularly dark fantasy or not at all?
We're just going to fly right by that. We're just going to fly right by what you did.
I did the so, yeah. Well, not Eberron knows that when it was originally pitched, it was pitched as Indiana Jones meets Casablanca. So I would not call Indiana Jones particularly dark fantasy. Sure, it had darker elements, but a big part of it was this: after the Great War, these different nations are still, it's Cold War. It's Cold War. It's noir. It's dark. It was meant to be that way. So there was a potential there for darkness, and you can find it if you look. Most players, I think, and game masters even, this magical element resonated more than the darkness. The sort of magitech, punk, whatever you want to call it, element, the lightning rail, and the artificers and those sorts of things, what were resonated most, which I think tells you where more players in general focused their attention. The darkness wasn't what the characters were. The darkness was the setting. And so that's what the players focused more on. But there is this idea that civilizations are falling. There was the dragons, and then the giants, and then the elves. And it's this constant corruption and fall of civilizations. And the current civilization is next unless something happens. So I want it to be portrayed as darker than it generally is, at least in my estimation.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Shawn. Yeah, noir is a great word to describe a lot of different parts of Eberron. The Indiana Jones sort of pulp action tends to be fairly separate from the noir. But if you're in Shawn, if your adventures are taking place in the City of Towers on those dark, shaded streets, I mean, that's sort of magic noir. And if you watch some of the really foundational noir films, not just things that are noir inspired of the modern era, but like, say, the film Gilda, which I saw a couple of weeks ago, it's a pretty dark movie. It ends on a happy note, but it's full of people really taking some bad hits, and some pretty sexist ones too, just because that's the roots of that time period. But yeah, I mean, every trick in the bag that you can throw at someone to beat them while they're down, I mean, that can happen in noir.
I don't know a lot about Eberron specifically, like not the deep lore of Eberron necessarily. So I don't think I'm qualified to make statements on the setting itself. But I think what people do often get confused by, and genres are fluid things anyway, I think, they have their definitions, but they can bleed into each other very easily. You see this a lot in music, the 7 different types of metal that there are. But I think the confusion with dark fantasy specifically can be that bad things happening does not equate to dark fantasy. Conflict is inherent in all storytelling, and therefore something bad happening doesn't make it dark fantasy. Often, something bad happening will actually take it away from being dark fantasy because that thing is so over the top bad, or there's so clear good and evil kind of delineations that it that there's no moral complexity to it. There's nothing to really debate. There's no themes or ideas that are in conflict except for, is it good to rule over everything or not? Or is it good if everything dies and is destroyed or not, But the flip side of that is, I also think that people get a bit tunnel visioned in on dark fantasy being low magic and everything is sad and bad all the time. Because dark fantasy for me is more about the themes and the kind of storytelling and the conflict of ideas between characters than necessarily the aesthetic and the set dressing. I don't think Eberron is by default a dark fantasy setting, but by the sounds of it, you could certainly run a dark fantasy game in there. But we made a video recently arguing that the TV series Arcane is a dark fantasy story, largely because of the moral complexity of the characters there and the inherent tragedy to that story. Overly Sarcastic Productions did a video talking about how love causes all the pain that happens in that TV series, because it's because the characters love each other so much, that's why they're constantly being torn apart, as opposed to hating each other, which is where we typically think of conflict. And that tragedy, that beautiful tragedy, is the thematic core of dark fantasy for me. I don't think it's necessarily about demons and terrible things happening constantly.
Right. Well, I think something that you're touching on here is that when we talk about genre theory, we're not dealing with genre isn't defined with hard definitions. It's fuzzy sets, right? It's things that blur around the edges and you're not quite sure where one thing stops and another thing begins. And if we talk about this moral complexity, right, that overlaps with a genre like noir. And then if we talk about, arcane punk, and there are elements of that overlap with this kind of neon noir concept. And then you deal with noir and the sort of setting trappings of those kind of texts, and you're dealing with a kind of a similar disillusionment and post-apocalypse that you would in like a Western text, right? Like it all just gets kind of mudgy into this big watercolor of like, I can't define where it stops. It does stop somewhere, but I don't know where. So it is something where I think high fantasy and dark fantasy don't have to be completely at odds. Like you look at something like Blade Runner, right? As a sci-fi, where it's like super high tech, but it is also gritty and grounded and on the street level, and that comes down to that sort of noir genre element that sort of comes through. And I think that that's true of Eberron as well, and depending on how each DM runs it and what they focus on.
For sure.
Blade Runner is such a good example of noir or neo-noir, because I mentioned this in the chat, but noir it's typically melodramatic, sometimes romantic, usually focused on criminals or detectives, and basically always with protagonists that are morally gray. They usually choose good at the end, but they kind of act in selfish ways along the way that harm the people, good, bad, innocent. Blade Runner is a great example of that. And I think that if you played Eberron in that way, you would really get to the heart of the setting there.
Or if everybody's covered in mud. That's the other way to tell. It's just everybody's covered in mud all the time. It reminds me of that bit from
You're right, it's the mud.
Monty Python's Holy Grail. Yeah, where he rides past, he's like, oh, that's a dark fantasy story. Or no, that's high fantasy. How can you tell? He hasn't got shit all over him. Moving on to Lolsworth's question. This one's an interesting one, actually, coming especially to us, is about the Kickstarter hype cycle. Is it good for a game? Is it good for DMs and players? And specifically what they're talking about is the fact that, Kickstarter has had a really big impact on the tabletop RPG industry over the last couple of years in particular. And a lot of companies that aren't Wizards or Paizo tend to use Kickstarter a lot to be able to publish their modules, their products, their third-party content, including obviously Ghostfire Gaming, Kobold Press, MCDM, and many other 2C Gaming, I believe. But what is the concern that Lolsworth is kind of bringing is like, is this just all marketing cycle? So much marketing is pushed out at the time the Kickstarter occurs or just before it, and then can tend to seem to go dead silent immediately after the Kickstarter until the product arrives and nobody hears anything for, however many years. That's a perception. I just want to make that statement up front. And I don't think necessarily true, depending on the company and the product.
See, this is, I want to hear from you three who actually have like insight and insider experience when it comes to the impact of Kickstarter on a product like this.
A game is much more than just a game. A game is its marketing. A game is its setting. A game is its audience. A game is lots of things. And hype of any sort can be really good for some of the aspects of a game, and it can be terrible for some other aspects of a game. If hype is affecting the mechanics of the game that you're making, and you realize that because of hype, you need to make the game not as good a game as it could be for marketing reasons, is the hype good or bad? I don't know. That's we were talking about Matt Colville last episode and his videos, talking about the game design. Same thing, right? Is that good because it's marketing and it's explaining and it's drumming up hype? Or is it going to be bad in the long run because it's going to affect the game designers' perceptions of what they need to make? And it's a tough question when you try to pull the strings of the business and the marketing and the audience management and so on, social media management, versus just the hardcore putting together of this entity that is a game.
When I think of the process of game development, and last episode we talked about the way that MCDM is building their current game, which is, pre-playtest with moderate public visibility. The Kickstarter and the marketing launch is in most cases the public's first view of a game, because they need to know what the game's about before they pay money for it. I think anyone would say that's a reasonable proposition. Mm-hmm. It's just that the time between getting the game, or the time between paying for the game and getting the game, is orders of magnitude larger than we're used to. And maybe we're used to Kickstarter now. Maybe that's a natural state of things again. But you don't even walk. You're on the online shop of the PS5 or Nintendo Switch or whatever. I want a game. You buy the game. You wait an hour. It's downloaded. You have the game. Bam. And so I think inherently the Kickstarter has to be part marketing. There's no way of avoiding it. But for people who are just making the game, as long as your company, like you're saying, Shawn, isn't, forcing you to react to early Kickstarter feedback, which typically is a trap, and can compromise the vision of your game. Unless that's happening, you're just kind of cooking along. Depending on when it happens, the game is either basically done, or it hasn't even begun yet. Rarely are games positioned so that they're in the middle of development when the Kickstarter hits.
Can I hear more about this this trap that you mentioned? Just because that's something that, like, from the outside, I don't know what you mean by that, and I would love to know more.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it a game receives feedback in one particularly productive way, and that's a well-organized playtest. Because you can control for variables that sort of mass, unregulated feedback simply cannot produce. If you have a way of getting the feedback you're looking for, you can channel useful feedback into the initial design goals of your game. Because most games, whether they're modules or core books or whatever, they'll start by a set of goals. What do we want to accomplish with this game? And if you just apply feedback willy-nilly, irrespective of those goals, all of a sudden you have an unfocused game. And because everyone thinks they know what would be best for the game, if you're not taking that feedback very carefully, you all of a sudden end up with gray mush. Because I think for the most part, everyone's feedback is really, really good. Everyone who thinks that the game would be great if it had X, that's awesome feedback for their vision of the game. And because Kickstarter is marketing, because you're showing off the 2% glossiest, most finished part of your game, the average viewer's understanding of what's actually going on is incredibly limited. And that can be a trap for game design, for new game designers especially, who don't have a really codified and sort of bulletproof process for making a game.
Yeah, I think marketing is an incredibly, it kind of can't be understated, an incredibly important part of getting a game out to an audience, helping a game find an audience. And it's why a lot of smaller creators, if you go and throw something up on Drive-Thru-RPG, or you go and throw something up on DM's Guild and, nobody purchases it, or you get very few purchases within the span of however much time, but you didn't do anything to market it, you didn't tell anybody about it, then of course it's just going to get buried in the hundreds of pieces of great content that are up on DM's Guild and Drive-Thru-RPG. And this is true for any, whether it's video games getting lost on Steam from a small video game company or whatever it happens to be. Among Us was hidden, I think, for at least 12 to 18 months before it was finally discovered and then blew up in popularity. The point being that, marketing, I don't think, should be seen as any sort of cynical or bad thing for a game. And in my experience, I've never seen a game really be affected, as in the game itself, be affected by feedback that came back from the marketing. Most Kickstarters will tend to run play tests kind of after the actual Kickstarter period and then gather that feedback in kind of a channeled way, rather than reacting to comments that are on the Kickstarter itself. So the marketing side of things is super important. And I think Kickstarter's been an amazing tool for providing opportunities and kind of a pathway into the industry for a lot of people, myself included. As a company, it's incredibly hard to start a company, and it's incredibly hard to get funding for a company. Kickstarter provides not only that funding from people who believe in the project, but it also provides a platform for marketing so that more people can hear about your project. And then if you can deliver on that, which most of these companies we've talked about have basically done every time, going above expectations, then the system works. Largely, yeah. I think.
I do think
I have something I'd like to say, but I'm worried that I've been talking a lot. So just let me know when this topic's at an end.
Okay, sure.
I was just going to say, I think it's easy at this stage in the existence of things like Kickstarter. It's easy to kind of lose sight of what the core of crowdfunding is. And it's the democratization of publishing, the ability to publish a thing, because even though we're at such a late stage that it's there are established businesses who, release every book through Kickstarter, and that's how they get them done. And so, you can kind of, to a certain extent, expect the audiences of those companies to support whatever new thing they're coming out with, and it probably will get funded successfully. It still is an indication of something that started small, something that couldn't publish without it, and that people liked enough to keep supporting. And it's, I mean, I would love it if systems like that didn't trend in a direction where, you know, specific individuals float to the top and everyone else now gets left in the rubble. That is something that we do tend to see, whether it's YouTube, whether it's DM's Guild, no matter what.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that the people who are kind of getting that consistent funding, that is still crowdfunded. You know what I mean? It's still,
for sure.
It's still driven by audience, which I think is pretty incredible, frankly.
Yeah.
2 words: potato salad. Do you remember the potato salad? The first time that Kickstarter came to my attention was a gentleman who kickstarted a potato salad that raised $55,492 with 6,911 backers. And that tells you everything you need to know about Kickstarter, about the democratization of creation. You have people giving money to amazing creators who would not be able to create otherwise. And you also have potato salad. And there's been a lot of potato salad made.
Shawn, would you say that Kickstarter is the worst system of funding except for all the other ones?
Except for all the others. That's exactly that. I was thinking to myself, should I say it again? No, I'm not going to. As we've said, right, it has allowed many creators who would not have been able to otherwise have their visions made real to do so. So thank Kickstarter for that. Thank crowdfunding for that. I'm also hoping that we get other vehicles for creation that aren't Kickstarter, so that we do break the cycle of let's have everyone do the same thing because it worked for this company, so therefore we have to do exactly the same thing, which has also led to a lot of heartbreak for both creators and consumers.
That's a really great segue into the thought that I was holding back earlier, which is that crowdfunding and shareholder funding actually have a lot in common. They probably have more in common than they have in difference. The main difference being that at least with crowdfunding, there's an element of community to it. There's an element of the people who want the thing are going to pony up for the thing, rather than, people who are ostensibly only interested in shareholder value being the ones that fund a company, even if that company is not making money, especially in the case of tech companies like Netflix and so forth. Crowdfunding, it's all people who want the stuff. But nevertheless, both of those models lead towards similar outcomes at some points. Just like you were saying, Shawn, let's follow the leader. Companies, because ultimately it's the company's decision. The company will aim towards what gets the money. And if shareholders think that this certain type of movie will get the money, or if the person who has to make the project in the first place thinks that the people who are crowdfunding the thing will only pay for the money, then the outcome can ultimately be the same. When you're thinking about it on a company level, things change when you're an indie, right? If you're a one-person operation and you just, you're going to make it no matter what, and you're just kind of doing a Kickstarter to see what level of fidelity you can do it at, it's a different conversation, because you were going to do it no matter what. But sometimes, the thought of the Kickstarter can make or break a project when even a small company, 10 people or fewer, wants to get something on the ground. 5 people or fewer, 3 people, in the case of some very indie games.
Yeah, it's super interesting, the dissonance between, on paper it should be right that, the big publishers, they are all the most interested in the lowest common denominator. So they're going to go do the most generic stuff. But this is crowdfunded, baby. So this is creator forward, and we decide what the thing is, and the people who want it, they're going to back it. But it is interesting to see that it does, in some aspects, just trend in the same direction, because business is business.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the same time, as Matt Colville said about his company, MCDM being a teeny tiny little kind of company, especially compared to Wizards, it's easy to think of the big operators in the tabletop RPG space as being big companies. but everything's very relative. You know, even the strong kind of big companies in the RPG space are still very small, kind of.
Actually, I think maybe the biggest problem with crowdfunding is how visible a misleading money figure is to the general audience. Because if you saw the amount of funding that, say, Coca-Cola gets, you'd bleed out your eyes, right? But because there are so many things wrapped up in that, all the costs, all the fees, manufacturing, all these very legitimate costs, before you even get to, you know, enormous CEO bonuses, right? But everything from labor to packaging to shipping to marketing, all of those things are involved in the process, and the average person has no idea how much some of those things, especially shipping, costs to RPG companies. And I'm not saying that to like be hard on anyone. I mean, I'm in the industry and I basically don't know what any of those costs are, but I know that they are huge in some cases, especially shipping. And I think when people see, oh my God, they've raised $8 million on Kickstarter, they must be rolling in Scrooge McDuck swimming pools full of gold coins. No, that's not the case at all. So many of the, I mean, that figure before the 10% the Kickstarter takes off of it, for one, it vanishes so quickly in the actual creation of the project, because this is for the making of a thing. It's funding for the making of the thing.
Yeah. My friend Teos Abadia has a blog at alphastream.org, and he breaks down how much it costs to create. And he has some pretty amazing numbers and also taken stories from other people who have had $1 million Kickstarters that have gone bankrupt trying to fulfill it. So, you know, it's good information out there for people who are interested in such things.
Yeah, Teos' blog is really fantastic.
Teos is a really smart cookie. I like that guy.
Pretty great.
He's okay.
He's okay.
Speaking of which, I want to do a horror-themed parody movie now. You know those horror movies where like you look at a picture and then you like die, or you watch a movie like The Ring and then you die? I want to do a parody one of those, but you look at Coca-Cola's funding and then you bleed out your eyes. And so nobody wants to see the page where Coca-Cola's funding is printed on it.
I think capitalist eldritch horror is an untapped genre. I think you should actually get on that.
All right. I think that's probably going to be time for this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, half of which was a game show about slang. Who knew? I hope everybody enjoyed this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. If you are listening to this on YouTube, if you are listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, any of those audio platforms, likes, stars, all that stuff helps us get this podcast out to more people, to more listeners. Somebody actually, speaking of Australian slang, somebody asked me why our podcast goes live at like midnight or 2 a.m. and told me to get offline and go to bed. The reason is because the majority of our audience is in the US. So if you are in Australia and want this podcast to go on at a reasonable time, tell your friends about it, I suppose. Let everybody know. For the streaming
time for all of us to go offline and go to bed.
Yeah. I've got a full day ahead of me. It's time for lunch. For the streaming crowd, we won't be here next week because we will be at Gen Con, so there won't be a streamed episode of the Lorecast next week either, but we will be back the week after that. I think that'll be Monday the 14th off the top of my head. It could be the 13th, whatever the Monday is in that week. We will be back then streaming at 7 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Did I get those the right way around? Or Eastern is Pacific. Now I'm confused.
No.
All right.
Pacific on the west, Atlantic on the east. I'm
gotcha.
earlier.
All right, gotcha. Well, you figure it out. My name's been Ben Byrne. I'm here with Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you at Gen Con if you're there. Ba-ba-da, 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 ba.
Ba-ba-da, ba.
Very good, very good.